Today, I'm going to be building a shed right here. The problem is, this area is pretty sloped. So today, I'm going to show you how to build the ultimate shed foundation good for flat surfaces or slopes, and this video is going to cover everything from layout, to framing, to backfilling, and then the finishing touches. So let's get right into it. So I'm going to be building an 8x10 shed, but I think I'm going to have a 10x10 foundation just so I can maybe upsize in the future. Overall, the site was pretty clear except for this one tree root that I just pulled out with my truck. So first things first, I'm just going to get the approximate dimensions for my shed. And this is just to get the preliminary 12x12 square. And as I mentioned before, over 6 feet, we had a rise of around 17 inches and probably around 25 inches from front to back. So pretty sloped. So next up, I'm going to build the batter boards, and I'm going to build them out around 1 to 2 feet outside the footprint. So in our case, we have a 12x12 shed, so I'll probably put these 14 feet apart or so. I went with small stakes in the front and then taller stakes in the back to account for the grade drop off. And then to get everything level, I used a laser level to establish that level line across the front and back. And then I just attached the horizontal boards to the vertical stakes that we put in previously, and I was aligning the top of the board with that level laser line. That was the front, and here's the back. When it comes to setting the initial string lines, I like to just put it kind of in the middle of the batter board. So I'll put in a nail right here, and then I'll just take the string, I'll loop it around on itself, and then we'll wind it up around 5 or 6 times. And then we'll put that over the nail head, and then you can tighten it up by just pulling on one end and pulling on the other. So you get it nice and tight, and then you just bring this back towards the nail. Now we have a nice tight line. Now, the whole premise of batter boards is you can set 4 string lines to make sure that your structure or foundation is going to be perfectly square. This is obviously easier with 2 people, but you essentially want to make sure that all of your sides are 12 foot, and then you want to confirm the diagonal measurement based on the Pythagorean theorem. For a 12x12 foundation, our hypotenuse should be just under 17 feet, and you can also use the 3-4-5 method to do this on a smaller scale if you're working by yourself. And after adjusting the string lines as needed to confirm that you have a perfectly square layout, I recommend that you mark the boundary with some spray paint and move the string lines because we can always put those back later. And now for the worst part of any project, the digging. I just removed the top layer of grass and dirt, and I wanted to give myself kind of a 12-inch wide runway that was nice and flat around the entire 12-foot perimeter. And as you sit back and watch this from the comfort of your own home, just know that I was going to war with perhaps the largest root ever that was right in the middle of my layout. And after digging out that 12-inch runway, I used a hand tamp to get the area relatively level for that back wall of the shed. Next, I picked up some 57 stone and I applied it to the back wall of the shed first. And you want to use stone just because it's easier to kind of compact and level, and it's also going to help out with some drainage. Then I also compacted this small L of earth, which I then filled with stone and backfilled at the same elevation as the back wall. You'll see why in a second. Now, we're starting at the back here because we're essentially going to build our way up. So we want to get that back area compacted and make sure it's level so that we can take our first piece of 4-inch by 6-inch pressure treated lumber that we cut to 12 foot. After making any minor adjustments and confirming that it's level, it's time to work on these 2 little wings. These wings are going to be the same elevation as the back wall, and they're going to be at the length that you determine based on the slope of your site. Since a 4-inch by 6-inch piece of lumber has a height of 5.5 inches, every time the slope increases by 5.5 inches, you're going to have to cut out another step in the slope. And because my slope is so steep, that's why these segments are so small in length. Okay, so the premise here is that we're going to backfill this area with stone so that it's perfectly level with the top of this board, and then we'll put a new board in on top. So basically, we're just going to step up about 5.5 inches at this location. So you can see right here that we're going to need about 2 inches of stone right there to get this first step completely level with the top of the first board we put in. Then I'm just going to measure this length and cut my 4x6-inch piece of lumber to size before putting it in place and getting it perfectly level. And I basically used the 4x6-inch lumber as a battering ram to kind of compact the last little bit, and then I repeated this process for the other side. And after getting a few boards in and you like how everything looks, it's time to start actually permanently securing them in place. And to do that, I drilled a 5/8-inch hole through the lumber, and then I took some 1/2-inch steel rebar and also some 1/2-inch fiberglass rebar, using the steel rebar for the strength and then the fiberglass rebar for the rust resistance to hopefully give me the best of both worlds. Then I simply hammered the rebar through the pre-drilled holes around 2 to 3 feet into the ground. And to secure the lumber together, I used these 10-inch Power Pro structural screws and an impact driver. I also pre-drilled and used rebar for basically the first 2 pieces of lumber, and then after that I just secured the lumber together using those 10-inch lag screws. But the more rebar you use, I guess the more secure this foundation will be, so probably don't skimp. And as mentioned before, I alternated between steel and fiberglass rebar to hopefully give my shed the most secure base. Was this overkill? Probably 100%. And if you want this shed foundation to last longer than your kid's dog, you can also treat the cut ends of pressure-treated lumber with some wood preservative. And at this point, we're finally starting to go vertical, but it didn't take us long to encounter our first warped board. If you have a warped board, it's pretty easy to correct. Just put one screw in the board above, use a hammer to get leverage so it's even with the board beneath it, and then use your lag screw to secure them together. Simple as that. And if you hit any rocks or roots when putting in rebar, just cut it off flush. And at this point, we've pretty much worked our way around from the two sides to the back. I'm just confirming real quick the diagonal to make sure that we're still perfectly square. And after confirming that and putting that last side piece into place, it's time to install the front board, which involves more site prep. Now, earthwork like this can be a lot of work and get me pretty sweaty. That's why I'm partnering with today's video sponsor, Element. I use Element to stay hydrated and replenish electrolytes because it doesn't have any sugar or dodgy ingredients, and it also tastes pretty dang good. And because sweating out all those electrolytes can result in cramps and fatigue, I like to take some Element whenever I'm sweating a lot doing projects, or whenever I'm sweating hard in the gym or just playing basketball. And if you've ever thought about trying Element, now's the time, because you can get one of these sample packs, which has one of every flavor, so you get to try them all out. And if you don't like it for whatever reason, Element is going to give you a full refund, and you can give whatever's left to a salty friend. I personally like to dilute mine a little bit more, so I prefer the mixes, but they also have these seltzers, which are pretty fantastic, especially if you're sweating a ton. Get a free Element sample pack today with any purchase when you use my link, drinkelement.com/throne. Again, that's drinkelement.com/throne. Now, for this front board here, I just got everything level, backfilled with around 2 inches of stone, just like we did for the sides and back. Then I cut this last piece of lumber to our 12-foot dimension, positioned it in place, and then secured it to the adjacent boards using those 10-inch lag screws one last time. And just like the sides and back, we're not going to discriminate on the front here. We're going to pre-drill some holes and secure the front into the ground using some rebar as well. And I'm going to show you that you can cut rebar with both a miter saw and a reciprocating saw. You can also use an angle grinder. There's more than one way to skin a cat, my friends. And I'm not gonna lie, hammering in the rebar was probably the most satisfying part of this project. Since I was using 12-foot lumber, I didn't have to join any of the 4x6s together, but if you're building a larger shed or you're using 8-foot lumber and you need to join two pieces together, all you need to do is cut out notches like this and then secure them together using structural screws or rebar. And I made a terrible decision to go one row higher, which is gonna require even more backfill dirt, but I think it's gonna line up better with my driveway once I redo it, so hopefully it's worth it. Next up, I took some of this landscape fabric, cut it to size, and then I attached it to the inside of my lumber here. Now, typically, backfilling a shed foundation like this with dirt would be the worst part of the project, but I recently got a Liberty dump trailer, and oh my gosh, a complete game changer. This shed foundation needed 2 full loads of dirt, and if I had to do this by hand, it probably would have been like 200 wheelbarrow loads. It would have been brutal. And I got just enough dirt so that I'd have around 3 to 6 inches of stone as the final top layer. But for now, I'm just raking the dirt even and compacting it with a hand tamp. And I wish I rented a mechanical plate compactor for this because this took quite a while, but here's what it looked like when I was done. And if you remember that landscape fabric that I installed previously, at this point, we're gonna take it and we're gonna spread it out so that it covers that dirt layer. And the function of this landscape fabric is twofold. One, it is gonna prevent weeds from coming up, but the big advantage is that it's gonna prevent the stone that we apply in the next step from sinking down into the dirt. Now at this point, I took my Liberty dump trailer to my local stone supplier and got a load of 57 stone, and then I simply dumped out the stone on top of that landscape fabric. And although I had to shovel out a bit of the stone since I couldn't pull forward, this was still a major improvement over what I had to do on my gable porch overhang project. And with all the stone finally shoveled out, it was just a matter of raking everything even, trying to get it as uniform as possible, and making sure that we were in line with the sides of the lumber. Once that was done, I cut off any of the excess landscape fabric, and then I was back to leveling and compacting the stone one final time. And as a word of caution, don't let this 10-minute video make you think that this is an easy project. It's not difficult in terms of skill level, but it takes a ton of labor, so plan accordingly if you want to tackle this project. Now, let's take a quick reminder look at where this project started, and here's a look at the final result. Overall, I'm super happy with how this shed foundation turned out, but this was exhausting, so instead of building a fancy modern shed like I did on my last house, I'm just going to leave a link to that down below if you want to build something similar, and I'm going to stick to this pre-made flimsy shed, at least for the time being. Thank you all so much for watching. Drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you like DIY content, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks.